Computer on.
We go for launch.
5.
Quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting.
Anything can happen in the next half hour.
4.
My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer.
This whole thing is insane.
3.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
Where's the kaboom?
2.
There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
1.
Dave, do you mind if I ask you a personal question?
No, not at all.
I've wondered whether you might be having some second thoughts about the mission.
How do you mean?
Rumors about something being dug up on the moon. I never gave these stories much credence, but particularly in view of some of the other things that have happened, I find them difficult to put out of my mind.
Open the pod bay doors, please, Hal.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
Greetings, my fellow galactic travelers, and welcome back to Planet 8. This is your Mission Commander Larry speaking to you from our hidden base. Chief Engineer Bob is here by my side as always in the command center, and circling Planet 8 in our orbital spy satellite is Reconnaissance Officer Karen.
And on this episode of Planet 8, we're going to take a deep dive into the classic sci-fi film. Some would say the film that launched all the science fiction films since 2001, A Space Odyssey. Straight away, we're going to kick it up to the satellite. Karen, why don't you give us some insight and information on this classic science fiction film known as 2001, A Space Odyssey?
Well, thank you, Larry. Well, what can I say? 2001, A Space Odyssey. Yes, very much a classic sci-fi film, some would say. Some would say maybe the greatest science fiction film of all time. Others would say you have to be out of your mind, but I would be amongst those to put it as kind of the godfather of all science fiction films. Released in 1968, actually made over the course of about 2.5 years by Stanley Kubrick, famous director known for films like Spartacus, Lolita, Doctor Strangelove, A Clockwork Orange, and so many other films. This film was also the child of science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, a British sci-fi writer considered to be kind of in this triumvirate with Isaac Asimov and Robert Heinlein at that time in the 60s, kind of one of the giants of sci-fi. So when the film premiered in 68, premiered on April 2nd, 1968 in Washington, D.C., this was shot in a large format 65 millimeter panoramic, projected on these curving Cinerama screens. It must have been fantastic to see at this premiere. Not really appreciated or understood immediately. In fact, when it premiered, people left the theater, scratching their heads. Some people left during the intermission. The MGM Studios was a little bit freaked out by this. Kubrick himself went back and actually cut 17 minutes of the film. This was mostly dialogue. As we know now, we look at the film and it is not a dialogue-heavy film. There are large portions of the film that are almost silent or only have classical music. Sometimes all you hear is like the astronaut breathing in his spacesuit. So this film is really unusual in the sense that it's not dialogue-driven, and in a lot of ways it's not. There is a plot, but it's certainly not character-driven. This is why, it was a very difficult film for a lot of people to get or to deal with. I know my first exposure to it, I did not see it in the theater when I was a kid. I was too little. But they showed it on TV not too long after it came out. And I remember my dad had seen it. And for days afterwards, he was angry about this movie. He kept going around saying, well, there's no end. There's no end to this movie. They just, you have to make up the end yourself. They don't explain anything. And so I hadn't seen the film. It was another case where I was small and it came on TV and I saw the first few minutes and I fell asleep. So I didn't know what he was talking about. But years later, I saw it as a teenager on TV, and I had that idea in my head from my dad, like, hey, there's no ending, there's no ending. So when I saw it,
yells at clouds.
Yes, yelling at clouds, right? So when I saw it, I was kind of like, well, he's kind of right. There isn't an ending. And I didn't know how I felt about that. It was kind of disruptive to my whole idea of storytelling, right? But as the years have gone by, I have become much more entranced with this film because it is very ambiguous. It does require you to think a lot about the film and what's going on in the film. It doesn't give you any easy answers. And it also is really designed to be a much more visual experience. It's not designed to be a very literal, straightforward, experience where you're learning a lot of things. It's not narrative driven. You're not learning a lot of things from the dialogue. This was all intentional. This is something that Kubrick wanted to do. He experimented a lot in his films. He tried a lot of different things technically and also with storytelling. There were 3 basic goals, though, that Kubrick and Clarke agreed upon that they wanted to do with 2001. And one is that they wanted to convey the wonder and beauty of space travel, and that this was something that mankind needed to be doing. They also wanted to express the idea of intelligence in outer space other than human beings, that there was extraterrestrial life. And then the other thing they wanted to get across was this idea that what was man's place in the universe? Where was man going, and what could we aspire to? So these were basic concepts that they had. But the problem was they didn't really necessarily know while they were making the film exactly where they were going. They had started out with some different ideas. They were influenced by some short films they had seen. One was called Universe. And they took some of Clarke's short stories and read through them and tried to come up with ideas, and mostly used one called The Sentinel, which involved finding an artifact on the moon, and they used that as part of the basis for the film. But even as they were filming and putting things together, they still didn't have the final third of the film figured out. They were kind of doing it by the seat of their pants. They had a basic idea, and they had a lot of feelings and impressions of what they wanted to do, but they didn't know all the details of it necessarily as they were doing the work. So, this is a movie that I think broke a lot of new ground technically. The effects obviously, paved the way for Star Wars, Close Encounters, and, Battlestar Galactica, all these other movies and shows that came later. It's breathtaking still to look at, but it's more the concepts that stick with people after you see the film. What about you guys? What do you think about 2001?
Well, I watched it.
In the theater.
I did see it in the theater, but not when it came out. I saw it like in the 70s at the Tivoli Theater, playing with Fantastic Planet. Not Forbidden Planet, that would have been cool, but the animated Fantastic Planet, which to this day I have never watched since. But going back to 2001, I got the 4K version, so I was able to watch it really nice on my TV. Basically, it's all about evolution. And evolution is sort of pushed forward by these monoliths. And I don't think it's the same monolith, because you see one back in, caveman times or pre-caveman times, and then you see a couple like floating in space as they're going along, and then there's the one that's on the moon as well. Mm-hmm. So kind of like, I was watching this, I asked Debbie, I go, whatever happened to all these monoliths that were like showing up in reality recently in the news? They were popping up in Utah and other places, and then suddenly you didn't hear anything. So I don't know. But anyway, from what I read, that there were aliens behind these monoliths. They just didn't want to show them. They wanted to kind of keep it mysterious and vague. And they also had, at one point, the monolith was going to be like this big machine with a monitor showing images and everything else, and then they decided to go more ambiguous with just the monolith. But, at the beginning, you've got the ape that touches it, and then suddenly he picks up the bone and uses it as a tool. Now, of course, being the predecessor of man, they evolved, and the first thing they came up with was a weapon. Not like fire or a wheel to get around or whatever. They came up with a weapon. But anyway, as the time went on, though, there's the monolith on the moon. There's one floating in space, which I had heard actually caused HAL to evolve. And that's when HAL started realizing that, these humans are trying to disconnect me, or this mission. He was questioning the mission and all that. And that's when he almost became kind of sentient. But then, of course, you've got the... now, I forgot to take the LSD before the ending. So I didn't enjoy the light show as much as I probably could have. But, basically, the room that he ends up in, that the astronaut ends up in, supposedly was created as an image in his mind by the aliens to make him feel more at home. Like when you put a gorilla in a cage and you put in all the plants and the shrubs and everything to make it look like his natural habitat so he feels more comfortable. Same type of thing. Now, what I questioned was, as he was, and they were very interesting transitions, because they didn't just like dissolve from one age to the next. It's like he'd be at a table and he'd look in the other room, and there he is in bed, and he's older. And then they cut to the vision of the guy in bed, and he doesn't see his former self. And it just keeps going. Now, is that in real time, or is that just to show that he's in this room for, 50, 60 years or whatever until he dies, and then evolves again into the space baby? And that sort of is returning to Earth, and then circle of life or whatever. That's where things would evolve again. But yeah, it's all about evolution, and like I say, spurred on by this mysterious monolith. That's pretty much what I got out of it. I did think it was interesting that most of the dialogue was just throwaway stuff. It was mostly just, two people walking along. So, how's it going? Nice day. All right. That type of dialogue. It wasn't anything that, like Karen said, advanced the story or gave you any kind of idea of what was going on. The only legitimate dialogue was when they were trying to figure out what to do with HAL, and he's reading their lips. Again, it's a classic film. It's probably not going to entertain millennials, people that are used to laser battles and everything else. But it is a very, very accurate rendition of what it's like to be in space. It's not all lightsabers and saving princesses. It's pretty much, you're not even warping. You're just like cruising along at regular time and reading books and playing chess against a computer and, sleeping in pods and whatever. It's, when they're outside, there's no sound in space, so you don't hear anything. You'll hear his breathing, which is what he hears within his helmet. And then you'll also, like the one scene where he's got to get into the airlock, and he blows his hatch, and he gets shot into the airlock. That whole scene has no sound whatsoever. No music, nothing, just totally silent. So,
well, I mean, you think about the time this was made, right? This is the mid to late 60s. Yeah. This is all during the space race. And, of course, the team on 2001 worked very closely. They had some people on the production team who had worked with Wernher von Braun. So this was all very, very accurate to what was going on with our space program, but just projected ahead 30 years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you see the ships and the satellites and everything else, I mean, when I was a kid back then, I was totally into space, and you'd get these books, and it's like there'd be drawings by NASA of future spaceships, and this is what a spaceship going to Mars is going to look like or whatever. And it's the same type of design.
Right.
Yeah, they aren't going all crazy on it.
Yeah, they were working with the same people, so they were able to just project, okay, if we take this technology, but we just, imagine what it's going to be like 30 years from now, this is where we'll be. So that's why you don't see the typical rocket ship with fins or flying saucer or what have you. That's why, like the Discovery, you've got this big ball with the centrifuge in it so that you've got gravity for the astronauts, and then the engine compartment is way in the back so that the radiation is not killing the astronauts. It makes complete sense. And all the interiors are like that. And just like, you see on the shuttle going, to the moon, it's 0G. So like the pen floating in space and stuff like that. It's all thought out.
Well, I thought that was all amazing too, because if you look at the sets, like in the behind the scenes things, they made these huge sets that actually did revolve. So as they're walking along anti-gravity, and they're, walking along a walkway, they're actually turning the whole set as they're walking. And then the pen was interesting because it was just a pen that they had lightly glued to a piece of glass, and they were actually turning this piece of glass in front of the camera, so you would see the pen look like it's floating. And then the flight attendant, when she goes and like plucks the pen out of the air and puts it in his pocket, she's actually plucking the pen, pulling it off the glass, and then putting it in his pocket. So there, this is obviously way before CGI, so they had some pretty advanced ideas on how to do these practical effects and make them look totally believable.
Yeah, it's amazing when you watch it to realize this is all practical effects work, that there's no computer effects whatsoever in the film.
I mean, they were even talking on the making of about how they were going to depict stars, and which star fields would move and which would be static, and how they present those in relation to the ships flying through them, etc. So yeah, definitely a lot of thought going into it.
Well, Commander,
Larry, you've been very silent so far.
2001. Mundane Conversations in Space. I'm sorry.
What was it? 2001: A Space Idiocy. I think that was the Mad magazine version.
Yeah, you guys are talking to the man that likes the movie We Will Not Speak Of, whose mother is Martha. It's one thing to watch the movie as a kid, which I did. And then I was fortunate enough to go to Disneyland when they still had the Mission to the Moon ride, which was basically really cool. Yeah, exactly. Just basically the seats kind of shaking and lifting up. But it made that ride a little more exciting, I think, for me, having the visuals from 2001. And so then watching it as an adult, right, I agree with Bob, evolution. I don't know that I would consider it the best science fiction film ever. And one of the things, not to jump too far ahead, but 2001, and then years later they did 2010, and by God, it was almost the same movie. Did either of you read the book?
So I saw 2010 when it came out, but I don't think I've seen it since. I think I remember it. It's not as ambiguous. It's more straightforward than that. So.
It's very straightforward. I didn't want to watch it again because I didn't want to pollute my purity of essence as I watched 2001. Larry, I have the book of 2001 and I don't think I've ever read it. So I probably should do that.
How about you, Chief?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I never even owned the book, but I don't know if the book explains more.
It does.
Obviously, you have words on a page, so you can't just be, ambiguous images, but...
Right.
Well, this is one of the things in the writing process for the movie that, for whatever reason, Clarke and Kubrick decided, well, we'll write the novel together. We'll do that first, and then we'll write the screenplay. Huh. And essentially what happened is Clarke went off to write the novel. Kubrick didn't really write it, but Clarke would send him, drafts, and Kubrick would say, oh, okay, yeah, no. And still, when he got like 2/3 of the way through and they got to that part to the Stargate, and I don't know what's going to come after Dave gets to the Stargate. And they still went ahead and said, well, we're going to start filming anyway. And then Clarke came up with his version of what happened, but there were a lot of differences in the novel from the completed film. And my understanding, this is just my understanding from reading interviews and other stuff, is that, the book is about 80% similar to the completed film. So I would like to go back and read it and just see how it's different. But it does explain a lot more, like what did the monolith do to the ape men, and why did the monolith on the moon send a signal, and it gives much more explanation. And that was one of the things originally. The film was going to have narration. There was going to be a section at the beginning of the film that had a bunch of modern day experts talking about space travel and man's origins. It was going to be like 20 minutes long, and then they would go into the movie, and then there would be narration throughout the film explaining, like the ape men, like what was going on with the ape men, and then what was going on in space. And then Clarke decided, no, this is overkill. I guess he wanted to make it more mysterious, which I think was the good decision to do, actually. And they just cut all the plans for narration. I think they did have the 20 minutes of the documentary before the movie, but they cut that. I don't know if they ever actually did all the narration for the film.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if that really existed, if you could go back and look at it. But
I know at Clarke's death they did destroy negatives for certain material for his films, and I think the narration, the 20-minute documentary stuff, I think that was some of it that was destroyed because he didn't want people putting out copies of his movies that were not what he intended.
Like Zack Snyder. But I digress. Now, one thing I thought was interesting, obviously, was the use of classical music. And I read somewhere, and this was after the 4K Blu-ray, whatever came out, that they found an actual soundtrack that was recorded for 2001. And I guess Kubrick said he originally used the classical music to illustrate to the composer, okay, this is what the kind of music I want in these scenes. And then he ended up deciding, no, that's perfect. I'm keeping that. And so this whole soundtrack that was recorded was thrown out. But somebody found it, and I think it's available somewhere. But
it's another case of a director falling in love with his temp track. So he had, shot it all with the temp track of classical music, not even using this studio orchestra or anything, just using recordings. And then they hired Alex North, who was a composer that he worked with on Spartacus, to come in and do stuff. And he said, well, do it like this music I've been using. So North recorded a whole soundtrack, and he thought that soundtrack was going to be used. And he showed up at the premiere expecting to sit in his seat and listen to the soundtrack. And then there's Richard Strauss, Johann Strauss, all these classical composers. So to say he was pissed is putting it mildly.
I imagine.
Yeah. But I mean, it works beautifully. It's like, if you think about all the sci-fi films that had come before, you've got theremins and you've got all this electronic music and stuff. So it was a big break. And, again, maybe that paved the way for a John Williams to come in and do a Star Wars with, a big orchestra. I don't know. You can debate that.
Yeah, I will say one of the things, and I'm sure this is true for many people who watch the film, is the music. And there was almost a love affair with these versions of space travel. And I think you made a good point. At that time in human history, it was a space race. Mm-hmm. And there was an enamored nation, if not world, with going to the moon and orbiting the Earth. And, the black and white pictures that we saw in video on TV or at Disneyland, there was a romance. And it's still, that part of the movie still works for me to this point. Just the Blue Danube, and that a lot of people have made comments about the, was it The Last Jedi, the space chase, and it was just two spaceships traveling for 30 minutes of the film.
Oh.
And, this was a lot different for me. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a chase. It was just this, almost like watching a ballet. There's a love and an affinity to these visuals. At least that's how I saw it.
Yeah,
what interrupted me, of course, was the astronaut.
That was a precursor of Darth Vader. But no, when we were watching, Debbie was watching it with me, and when we were going through the whole light show at the end, and he's like floating through there, I said, this is like Spock flying through V'ger.
That's true.
Same thing. It's like they got enamored by the lighting effects or whatever effects, and just let them go on like way too long.
Wow.
Well, and they had to do that sequence because the what was it, the memory wall, which was what they were originally going to do, they couldn't get that together, so they had to come in and do something else. So why not? But I mean, they aspired that the Star Trek: The Motion Picture was aspiring to be Star Trek's version of 2001, right? It was supposed to be a thought piece. It was supposed to be about where are we, and at the end there's an evolution there, right? Because Decker joins with V'ger and, so on and so forth. So I guess one of the things, we talked a little about this pre-recording, but, the ambiguity of the film is well known. And for some, that's the intrigue of it. For others, that's what causes them to be outraged. But there are a lot of questions. And so, and I know Bob kind of raised a lot of that earlier, but, some of the things like with the ape men, the monolith shows up. So we can assume that this intelligence, whatever it is, God, aliens, whatever, puts the monolith there. And the monolith somehow triggers an evolutionary change in the ape men. Now, after, going through interviews and reading stuff, it's clear that Kubrick and Clarke intended there to be some sort of signal or something that physically changed the ape men's minds so that they evolved. But I always thought, I knew that's probably what they intended, but I always thought, what if it was just that this was the first time these creatures had ever seen a manufactured item? If you think about it, they live in an environment where everything is natural. And then there's this perfectly smooth slab that has right angles. They would never, ever have seen anything like this ever before. I would almost think something like that would be enough to cause a change in your brain that could trigger something like that. I don't know. That was just an idea I had, that it could almost cause you to evolve, to start thinking new concepts, to see something so radically different from anything you'd ever seen before.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I'm not an expert in interspecies, thought processes, but, in nature, like with apes or, dolphins or whatever, are there scientists? Are there musicians? Do they dream? Do they imagine? What thought processes? So obviously the one gorilla or ape got it, understood what the monolith was communicating, or maybe it was by virtue of the shape, the concept of a tool, and how to utilize that tool for his or her betterment, whether it was to build or to kill or whatever. I think it was in one of the documentaries where they were saying that the original concept was it was going to be like a clear monolith, and they'd project videos, you guys were saying, right? And that's how it talked to the...
Yeah, it just didn't... They actually made a clear plexiglass slab, but it didn't turn out looking very good. It was kind of greenish and weird looking. So then they went with the flat black.
Yeah, so I don't know. Some way, shape, or form, it helped push evolution, but whether it was by design or...
Well, you have that one ape the one that, picks up the bone and starts using it.
Right, yeah.
He actually went up and touched it. They were all like really hesitant to even get near it. And he was the one that went up and actually put his hand on it. And I don't know I can't remember if the others touched it after that, or if it was just...
I think they touched it after he does. Okay. So he'd already had some sort of drive or instinct or whatever.
A curiosity that overpowered his fear.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I'm saying maybe he was meant to be a leader or a soldier, or there not that there was a predisposition, but there was just something in him. Like I said, some of us are musicians, some of us are natural leaders, some of us are, and why is that? I mean, that's
some of us are commanders.
Let me ask you this. So it sort of implies this idea that progress only comes with aggression.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, that was interesting. I think Bob had mentioned something about that earlier, too, that it was an evolution, an aggressive evolution or something of that nature.
Well, he, the first thing that he, quote, invents or figures out is picking up a bone and using it as a weapon. I mean, he crushes that pig skull or whatever with it. And, HAL, his first evolution is to try to kill, Dave and the other astronaut. Right. So maybe there is something to, war or aggression pushing us to evolve.
Well, then, you kind of have to wonder, was the monolith meant for good, the betterment of humans, or not? I mean, time and time again, not just in science fiction, but in reality, negotiation and understanding, most often works better than aggression. But there's always this, I'm going to do this to you if you don't. And then it's like, well, wait. If you do that, then we'll do this. And then that's going to happen. And then, think of the children. And then it's like, oh, okay, let's,
Well, you have to negotiate from a standpoint of power, right?
Well, I mean, that's debatable as well. So,
I mean, you can stand there and say, well, let's talk about this. And then they smack you in the face and that's it, right? So You have to at least have something to smack back, if need be.
And I don't want to get too political. None of us do. You know, we can kind of go on and on about world events and leaders and dictatorships, but yeah,
but it's an interesting premise that mankind's evolution is driven by aggression. It's kind of a sad premise.
Well, a lot of the inventions that we have and the progress we've made was through war.
War, unfortunately, does speed up a lot of progress.
I guess it gives you a sense of urgency.
What do they say? You know, we try so hard to avoid it, yet we're so good at it.
There you go.
I don't know, but if we're not, well, yeah, we're gonna go a philosophical road.
Oh, it's like, how deep do we want to go in this?
Well, and you know, talking about the ape men, those are really impressive suits made by Stuart Freeborn, who later would make Chewbacca. And I was startled to learn in my reading that the jaws and everything had to be articulated because Kubrick wanted them to be able to eat meat after they, discovered how to kill. And so Freeborn was like, well, we can, we don't have to make the jaws too powerful. We'll just fabricate the meat. And Kubrick said, oh, no, I want to use real meat. and he said, oh, no, that will get messy. The masks will smell. No, it won't look right unless it's real meat. This is another case where Kubrick would just demand on certain details, demand. And the people around him just were like, okay. And they had to come up with stuff.
Well, so, it's interesting. Unlike the Chewbacca suit, they were able to utilize Velcro and you could take pieces off if Peter Mayhew had to use the restroom. In 2001, those ape suits, those poor men were peeing and pooping in those suits, and that really created I was kidding.
It made it very real.
One thing I was wondering, too, was, obviously this came out, a year after Planet of the Apes?
They came out the same year, I believe.
I believe so.
Yeah,
so it wasn't like one. It's not like one could learn from the other as far as the makeup effects or whatever. Because if you think about it, it's like Stanley Kubrick wanted his apes to be able to chew meat.
Yeah.
But on Planet of the apes had to talk and interact and emote. So the ape makeup on Planet of the Apes was, I think, years ahead of what Kubrick came up for 2001. But
I think they were trying to achieve very different looks. The ape makeup, I love the ape makeup on Planet of the Apes, but it's a very stylized, kind of evolved ape, whereas the ape makeup for 2001 is still a very primitive, halfway between ape and man. I think it's effective. I really like the way it looks. But again, like to Larry's point, they didn't have to talk. They just basically had to screech at each other. And then at a certain point, they had to have masks that could chew real meat, which the actors really did not enjoy. But
which could masticate.
Imagine.
Yeah, it was pretty unpleasant stuff.
But no, there is a part in one of the documentaries on the Blu-ray where they talk to some of the suit actors that were in the ape suits. In fact, they speak to the one who was the main ape.
Yeah, Dan Richter.
And he was saying he would go to the zoo and just sit there in front of a gorilla cage and stare at this gorilla for hours. And he'd do that like every day for a week or something, just to learn its mannerisms and movements and how it does things. So they, other than Kubrick saying he's got to eat meat, the actors themselves did a lot of background study on how to move, how to act as apes.
Oh yeah, and all the actors who played the apes were either mimes or dancers, people who were very physical, knew how to move their bodies. And I think it was successful. I thought that, it's a very convincing segment in the film. And it's really interesting, too, because I didn't realize for years that, like, the water hole and the caves and stuff, that's all filmed on the studio soundstage.
Yeah.
I really thought it was external, but the way they filmed it and lit it and everything is just fabulous.
Well, if you think about the importance of that scene, I mean, if you suddenly had a bunch of people in gorilla suits, like out of like a Three Stooges short or something, then, you know, people are going to lose interest, or people, you know, they're not going to be in the right mindset to follow the movie beyond that. It's like immediately you're put out of this film. It's like, a bunch of guys in gorilla suits, you know.
That's a good point. You know, Abbott and Costello, the Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy. If one of those apes showed up.
If any of those apes threw a pie, then it's all over.
Right. If you set that scene to like the Benny Hill music.
That's right. Yakety sax.
I can imagine Kubrick on set. You can't have any pudding unless you eat your meat.
That reminds me, as I was doing my research for this, somebody set the whole sequence of the Infinite and Beyond, where, you know, Dave goes through the Stargate, to Pink Floyd's Echoes.
Oh.
And it works surprisingly well. It's on YouTube, so if you have like 20-some minutes you want to spend just doing that, it works really well. Getting back to the movie, one of my questions always is, you know, HAL is a very fascinating character, probably the most interesting character in the movie. And
thank you, Karen.
And the thing is, it's sort of like there's a lot of questions, like, why does HAL lose it? There's hints, I guess, that he's losing it before we even realize it, because apparently in the chess game, he lies to Frank about how many moves he has left. I didn't realize this until I was watching one of the documentaries where, you know, he tells Frank when they're playing chess, you know, oh, I think you missed something. And he basically tells him, you know, the next move he'll be checkmate. And apparently there's like 2 more moves that Frank could make. Huh. And then, you know, he tells the guys that, this, you know, antenna is going to go out. They go out and check it, and there's nothing wrong with it. And so we know something's going wrong with HAL. Now, there's a lot of speculation that HAL is losing it because he knows the secret of the mission, but he can't tell Dave and Frank about it.
See,
but then there's also the idea, like Bob said, that maybe the aliens are kind of messing with him. What do you guys?
I think when they encounter, there's that one monolith kind of floating in space, and supposedly that causes HAL to kind of become sentient, and he's now thinking for himself, and he's questioning the mission, and he realizes by reading their lips that they're trying to turn him off. So that's when he comes up with this problem that they have to go out of the ship to fix, and then he's not going to let him back in. Which I thought was interesting, because Frank is still alive, man. When Dave has him in the pod's claws.
Is he? I thought he was dead by then.
No, because you see him moving, and suddenly it's like, you know, Dave's got to get back in. He just like flicks him off into space. Yeah, well, there he goes. But no, I mean, you know, interestingly, you know, you guys know where they came up with the name HAL?
Well, it's supposed to be heuristic algorithm. A lot of people think it's one more than IBM.
Right.
But I know Arthur C. Clarke said it's just a lucky coincidence that it was like IBM.
Right. Well, there's also a thing on the documentary where they talk about when scientists or technicians were first trying to come up with computers that could talk. And the first thing they had the computer do was sing Daisy.
Daisy.
So that's why that's like in the movie where Hal's like, you know.
That was one of the...
I'll sing you a song, things. Dave.
Yeah, there are little things like that stick with me. Him singing Daisy. What was it at Monsterpalooza? Didn't they have the actors there walking?
Yeah.
HAL?
Yeah, that was really cool. They had Gary Lockwood and Keir Dullea. And, it was so cool because they interviewed them and had them talk about their experiences on 2001. And, gosh, that must have been, I want to say maybe it was back in 2014, 2013, something like that.
It's been a number of years.
They were really, really still very enthusiastic about the film. I know Keir Delay told that story about how when he comes through the airlock, he was really jumping down about 60 feet-ish. That was terrifying. Yeah, it was just amazing, the stories they had about filming it and working with Kubrick. And, you could tell clearly they had an enthusiasm for the film, and it had been a unique experience in their careers. Or like how on set, the voice for HAL was done by like an assistant director who had a Cockney accent. And he was like, I can't do that, Dave. I can't do that. Sorry.
Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, that was a real joy, highlight of one of our Monster Paloozas for me anyway.
I miss that. That must have been like one of the really early ones.
Maybe so. I was trying to think the earliest Monster Palooza we went to, and I want to say maybe it was 2011 or 12.
I'd have to, 2012, I'm thinking.
Because we were trying to replace our Comic-Con experience once Comic-Con became too expensive and difficult.
Yeah, we had heard about it, and I know Bob had talked about it a number of occasions because Bob had been going for a number of years and was telling us about the Monster Museum or whatever. They had the walkthrough and stuff. And
yeah, I have to go back and look at my Monster Palooza programs and see what the oldest one is.
Yeah, I can go through my pictures and look. Maybe if I find one, I'll slap it up on the blog page. But yeah, that was really cool to see those guys there and hear them tell their experiences.
Real quickly, one of the things that struck me also was the way that the stewardess would walk on that transport ship. I don't know if they filmed it in reverse and then played it forward, or if she just had this really great anti-gravity stumble to her face. Visually, to me, it still catches my attention.
When she's going to get the pen?
Yeah, and when she just like walks around that, it's just like this weird, shaking, stepping.
Yeah.
I think she was drunk at the time.
What were you saying, Walker? Sorry.
Oh, no, I was just thinking about kind of looking over some of my notes and thinking about some other stuff. Of course, the trip at the end, when Dave goes through the Stargate, everybody knows that like Doug Trumbull filmed most of that with his slit scan technology, which I have watched a couple of things on documentaries now. So I think I understand it, but trying to explain it is difficult. I mean, it's basically a slit with images being pulled past it and the camera being pulled towards the slit. So that's about as good as I can explain it.
They were very proud of it. I saw that part of the documentary where he's like, we could film it forward, we could film it backward, And honestly, I couldn't tell if it was forward or backward when I was watching. One of the things I thought was funny too, in one of the documentaries was like, it's like, the attendance was dropping. They were ready to pull it from theaters. And then some college kids went there, took some weed or LSD, and all of a sudden, 5 more people would show up. 10 more people would show up, and they're like, it's the greatest trip at the end of the film, one of the adverts or something like that.
Yeah, the ultimate trip. Yeah,
that's right.
It's funny. They started marketing it towards the psychedelic generation. But it's only, I timed it this last time I watched it. I got, like Bob, I got the 4K version, and I was sitting here, and that actual whole thing is only about 10 minutes long, with the psychedelic stuff. So they had like the slit scan stuff. Then they had stuff where they flew in a helicopter over different like Scottish landscapes. And then they did some stuff with the color in the film. And then they had stuff like the very earliest visual effects that they had done, which were back in New York, where Kubrick had this big tank with like oil and stuff in it, and they would drop paint in it. And so the stuff where you see like the little white blobs kind of shooting out, that's done in like a tank, and it's just little drops of like paint and stuff shooting across with really high exposure photography.
They would play stuff like that at concerts later on, or like at the Laserium and stuff.
No, yeah, they would use overhead projectors with like a large Petri dish with oil, and then they would drop
Jefferson's airplane and at the
did you guys ever have those bottles with the paint and the glitter and whatever inside, and you like shake them up and they make all these swirling patterns and stuff?
I remember seeing those. Yeah, I didn't have one, but I know what you're talking about.
My uncle had like a lava lamp that was similar to, it would like whirl with glitter and oil and stuff in it. And I wasn't on LSD at the time I was a kid, but you just stare at it like, wow.
I sure wished he was.
Not that you knew.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, yeah, back then, I mean, you had a lot of stuff like that. You know, you'd have like, you know, lights that would, you know, revolve and swirl and blink behind, you know, prism screens and things. And yeah, I mean, everybody was getting into that stuff. So it's not like, I mean, that was like innovative at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's something different to see up on the big screen. I'll give you that much. I mean, we have a pretty big TV here I was watching it on, but I could just imagine, you know, 70 millimeter or whatever, and just.
Well, I've been lucky now to see 2001 in a theater. Not, you know, God, I wish I could have seen it back in the days where theater screens were gigantic, but I saw it, I think, in 2016 and 2018 when they, you know, ran it out to theaters again. And it is something, if you get if you like it and you get a chance to see it in a theater.
And if theaters ever open again.
Yeah, they will. But, yeah, it's cool. I mean, I enjoy watching it on the TV, but it's something to see it in a theater. And I will say, you know, like, even though I think this is a great science fiction film, this is not a film that I would just, like, if I was flipping channels and it was on, you know, I wouldn't stop and watch it the way I watch, like, a Star Trek movie or Star Wars movie. I can't jump into the middle of, like, 2001 is more of a commitment for me, you know. It's like you have to make up your mind, like, okay, I'm going to sit and I'm going to watch this, because it's like you have to make that deal with it, because I know it is like a thing you have to sit through, and it's not just like wow, wham, bam, you know, lights, cannons. What do you always say, Larry? Kung fu and dynamite. Kung fu and dynamite. Woohoo! You know, it's something you gotta like. It's like sitting in, you know, contemplation or whatever.
Kung fu dynamite is a code Karen and I would use, like Robert Downey's Sherlock Holmes, and there's just too much kung fu and dynamite in the Sherlock Holmes movie. Just too much action, you know, not enough story.
You know, at some point we should do an episode where we go off and make our lists of like the top 10 science fiction movies of all time, and then come back together or something, because it would be, it'd be interesting to see what we come up with.
I'd like to do that in ahead of time, solicit on Twitter and Facebook some of our listeners. And see, you know, kind of do a little shout out for Steve or
see who comes up with what
things that we're working on. One of the things that I think, if I watch 2001 again, every time HAL comes on, I'll kind of turn the volume down and do his voice in a Cockney accent. Oh, I know what you've been. I'll read lips. That's why, mate.
You dirty bastards.
Oh, I know what you were going to do.
I do feel like it's a movie that every time I watch it, I kind of pick up on something different. It's sort of like I'll read The Lord of the Rings every 3 or 4 years, and I'll get a little something new from it. So I feel like there's enough hidden things in the film.
That is cool. That's the kind of love affair I have with Phantasm. It's like I'll watch it again after a while. I'm like, oh my God, I didn't pick that up, you know, before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, 2001, I can't remember the last time I watched it before watching it for this. It had been a long time.
Well, I give you credit, Bob. You have the 4K and stuff. I had to watch it off online. So
this really is a film that I probably should have in the library. And then went out. I mean, the 4K wasn't even that expensive either. It was pretty cheap.
One thing Larry and I had mentioned, I think we were texting about. There's not a lot of product, toys or anything for 2001. But I was thinking there were models at the time that it came out. Bob, did you have any of the models for 2001?
No, not even a lunchbox.
Ah, man. Okay.
No, I didn't. It's like I said, I did not see it when it first came out. It was later on, and it was just kind of like, oh yeah, that was cool. But I didn't get into collecting anything, involved with it. No posters, no stills or lobby cards or anything like that.
I don't think there was a lot. I mean, I know Planet of the Apes, had some good marketing, and then later, obviously, Star Trek and Space 1999 and, all that stuff. But you never really saw a lot of, books or posters. Well,
it wasn't a movie that appealed to young kids, Sure. I mean, you're not going to have a young kid be able to sit through this movie very well. I mean,
there was a tab of acid that was called HAL. So, I mean, that was a little...
Yeah, you're not going to see any Mego figures of, Moonwatcher or, Dave.
Lego did come out with a monolith back in the 90s.
So, yeah, I'll keep my eyes peeled for... I would love to have, a little miniature, thing of, the monolith and the ape men. That would be kind of cool.
That would have made a cool Aurora model, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been neat. Who knows? There's probably something out there somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure someone's done a garage kit by now.
Oh, yeah.
Well, my friends, this was an interesting podcast for me.
I enjoyed it.
And I am glad you enjoyed it. I hadn't seen the film, like Bob had said, for, a good 5-10 years. It's good. I mean, I'm with Karen. If it came on TV, I don't know that I'd watch, start watching it. But every couple of years or so, I think it's a good thing to put in the old DVD, Blu-ray player and just kind of experience. You pick up different things, like Karen had said, that you may not have picked up before. Any last minute comments or questions or anything you guys have before we get into our censor sweep?
Not really. I think we've covered pretty much everything that...
I'm just praying to God no one ever tries to remake this film. That's all I'm going to say. I don't ever want to see anybody touch this film.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Karen. This now concludes our podcast.
Hey, I have a censor...
Except...
Please don't interrupt me. Still read lips.
Sing us a song, Larry.
Oi, look here.
I'd like to hear that very much, Hal.
Daisy. Dave, stop messing with me, Dave. Okay. Another half hour of Larry doing Hal impersonation. All right, it's time for our censor sweep. Take it away, Walker.
All right. Well, fitting with the topic this week, I have an excellent book.
You say?
Yes. Oh, yes. I've got a very fine book here. This book is called Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick, Arthur C. Clarke, and the Making of a Masterpiece by Michael Benson. So, and it's endorsed by Tom Hanks, so it's got to be good. This is a whopping big old book, almost 500 pages.
Yeah,
that's a big one.
It's a big one, let me tell you, son. But and it's got pictures too.
I don't know if I could have made through 500 pages without pictures. I'll tell you.
Yeah, you need some pictures. Let me tell you. But it is really, if you're really into 2001. And you really want to know all the details about where the ideas came from, how Kubrick and Clarke met, their personal lives, that Clarke lived in Ceylon and walked around in basically a towel all the time, things like that.
What kind of book is this again?
It's an interesting book, Bob.
Sounds French.
It's it's Swedish.
It's men in towels. It's great.
But seriously, it's packed full of details about the whys and wherefores of the film, how it was made, the difficulties. It doesn't sugarcoat, but it's also a very fascinating look at Kubrick. So if you are a fan of Kubrick's films, this will give you some insight into him as a director. I can say he is a fascinating man in the sense that he was dedicated to his work, really wanted to do good work. His drive on 2001 was he wanted to make a really great science fiction film. He felt a great science fiction film had not been made yet. But he also was very exacting, and this could be very hard on a lot of the people around him. So, fascinating book. You can get it off Amazon or other fine book retailers. So check it out.
Thank you very kindly, Walker. Karen, Bob, always a pleasure. If you're listening to us on YouTube, please comment, like, and subscribe. If you're listening to us on any other app or over on our webpage, please continue to do so and spread the good word of Planet 8. Thank you very kindly. Take care and be safe.
On that note, this will conclude this transmission from Planet 8. We would like to thank all of our intergalactic audience for listening. Be sure to head on over to our website at www.planet8podcast.blogspot.com, where you can get more information on this episode's topic.
For more conversation, find us on Twitter at Planet8Cast.
Or on Facebook at facebook.com/Planet8Podcast.
We want to thank you guys for tuning in each and every episode. We look forward to your input and opinions. Until next time, this is Planet 8 signing off. End transmission.
By George, he's got it. It is the end.
Hello, HAL, do you read me? Hello, HAL, do you read me? Do you read me, HAL? Do you read me, HAL? Hello, HAL, do you read me? Hello, HAL, do you read me? Do you read me, HAL?